Welcome to TecoGuide, the only app designed to help you navigate your college and career journey in the quickest and most affordable way. This podcast is brought to you by Edtequity, dedicated to opening doors to higher education and career opportunities for all.
Hey y'all, this is Karina Gutierrez, your TecoGuide content creator. Welcome back to our academic and career path series, where we'll be igniting your motivation through conversations and chismes. But before we get started, make sure to check out our free TecoGuide app, where you can access more content like this, as well as pathways for your success. So today's guest, we have a writer, a traveler, and a former union organizer who has dedicated himself to advocate for justice in both California and Minnesota. And he is also the homie, Filiberto Nolasco Gomez. Hi, Filiberto. How's it going?
Hi, good. I'm glad you mentioned chisme, because I think throughout my life I've become a professional chisme, both being a journalist and a communications person. And that means a lot to me.
Oh, good. Perfect. I was hoping that I've been hesitant to bring it up in different with different guests. Okay, cool. You catch my drift then, because something when we were kind of developing this, I had mentioned to others, and I was like, well, it's like chismes. We're just having a conversation. Yeah. It's just, we're just talking. So, and one thing for our listeners out there, one of my little nerdy side is going to come out. One of the tenets of critical race theory and for critical race theory is counter storytelling, and we'll get into a little bit more about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm glad you're one of my people when it comes to stuff like that. So, so let's just get into it. I know I gave a brief synopsis of your background and how you were a traveler and a former union organizer, but let's take it back. Where are you from? Where'd you go to high school? How was it growing up? What was your environment like that kind of encouraged you to go into higher education? I know that's a lot in one, but just kind of your background.
Yeah, and having gone to college and grad school, I'm really used to synthesizing my personal narrative, right? It's something that they force us to do, is tell your story really quickly and try to get grants and scholarships, right? But so I grew up outside of East LA, in Montebello, which is outside of Los Angeles. And I was thinking about this a lot lately, but so much of my passion for advocacy and my passion for telling my story, but also helping other people tell their story, really comes from just a lot of hopelessness that I felt as a child. I didn't grow up in a very wealthy neighborhood. A lot of folks that are brown in the United States, I grew up poor, not getting the resources that I needed. And I think especially for brown folks out there, it's something that we don't often want to recognize, is I just didn't have very good parents. I don't have parents that I romanticize. I don't have parents that I look to as Mexican immigrants that did all these things for me. They were really abusive. And I think really my sense of advocacy started with them, is noticing how inconsistent both my parents were, how they sort of lacked integrity. And that early need to hold them accountable is basically what shaped my life. That is what drives everything for me, is seeing these situations where folks are being mistreated, or folks are being mistreated, and I want to hold folks accountable to that. I want to change that situation. That's why I worked in unions. That's why I've been an investigative journalist. And, that shapes a lot of my work, but also interpersonally, I've done a lot of healing to work through that and be able to talk about it. The reason why I can talk about it openly is I've done a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of work to deal with my past.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of common tropes within first generation students, as you are one yourself, is that it's always I fortunately had my parents behind me. I wanted to make them proud as well as myself. But we don't often hear those other narratives of people being super, super honest and saying, my parents weren't the best role models. My parents weren't there for me. So, thank you so much for being super, upfront about that, first and foremost, So where is it that you went to high school again?
Right. More biographical information.
Sorry. No, it's great.
No, it's good. So I went to Montebello everything. So it was Greenwell Elementary, then Montebello Intermediate, then Montebello High School. And then I went to, I was very much part of what I've understood to be my trauma response is I was always a very withdrawn child. I was a very nerdy child. I was always reading, like the first book I remember reading, I was in 6th grade or something, and it was a 500 page history of organized labor in baseball. Like, that's just the kind of mentality.
Oh, wow.
And that's actually where I got my interest in labor unions, because I read about how my favorite Dodger players had become free agents, and that the owners had controlled their playing lives before that, and it was really significant for them. And, as a young child, that's what opened up my imagination, just reading a lot. So I knew I was college driven. I knew that's the place where people that read a lot and that are smart and that are a little strange need to go. Certainly my parents reinforced that too, but they didn't really understand what college was. They were just like, you got to go do that, in Spanish, but they really didn't know how to support that process. And so I ended up going to a really elite small private school called Pitzer College, because they did a recruiting program for brown kids. And I was like, I want to be an anthropologist. And they were like, yeah, you're awesome. So that really motivated me a lot. And then I ended up going to grad school later as well, focusing on contemporary Guatemalan history.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but I know, we mentioned about you being a first generation student and your experiences as that. And Pitzer College is a private institution. It's a wealthy institution with a white dominant upper middle class institution. And you're a young Chicano Mexican coming from Montebello, California.
With no money,
from
nothing.
Different, nada que ver, right? So what was that like? What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think about that time period now, and I wish I had a lot of the language that youth now have. I wish I had the language of white supremacy. I wish I had the language of colonization, because that's what was happening. There was so much white supremacy going on, because it wasn't just that they were white, it's that they were wealthy white people. And wealthy white people are a whole different animal. But I think along with that, what really was troubling for me and what really raised my consciousness a lot was I was also running into a lot of middle-class brown folks, upper middle-class brown folks, and I just didn't know how to get along with them, because I'd grown up so poor that I just didn't identify with them. So it was a really harsh lesson around like who is family and who is my community, right? Because I was already from the beginning organizing dining hall workers at Pitzer and organizing labor unions, and I was really involved. And the people that were down for it were always the working class folks, whether they were brown or white. And a lot of the times the upper middle class brown folks just did not want to have anything to do with it. And that's like, my only community are the Spanish speaking immigrants in that dining hall. Like, yes, I will do whatever I can to advocate for them in this really white, really overwhelming space. So yeah, that's the way I dealt with it. I just got really involved, because I was like, these wealthy white kids are not my community. These wealthy brown kids are not my community. I'm going to find my community. And they were the dining hall workers.
Yeah, and I think that's really important that you bring up, these other brown kids that we may look alike, but socioeconomically we're not alike at all. And it's not that you can't find community in that. It's just, for your experience, you didn't, because it was just a big shift. And that kind of speaks to me, because I also went to a private institution. It was a very wealthy private institution. Yeah, I did. I went to St. Mary's College of California.
Oh yeah, you did. Oh no, yeah.
Yeah.
Healthy for you, yeah.
But luckily, luckily and also not so luckily, because of the age range that I was in when this happened, but I went to a very white high school, and I grew up I went to a bilingual dual immersion K through 8, but I went during middle school. It's a long story, but I grew up not the way that these other kids did in high school. So that slap in the face of what, whiteness was for me happened at 14. So I was like, what the heck? And I wasn't very articulate on with myself about how to express, the differences between what racism and white supremacy is, especially to these kids who literally asked me one time, like, what's it like living paycheck to paycheck? And I was like, oh shit, okay. We're not from the same, we're not from the same
hood. We did not grow up in the same hood, my homies. Like, no. Well, that was part of it too. Like, I grew up with gang members and stuff, and I would tell people that, and they would be like, oh man, like, that's so interesting. I'm like, that's not interesting, homie. Like, these are just the folks that raised me in English, right? Like, I had my Spanish speaking community, and there's also an English community.
Yeah. And I think that's a very common trope for at least a lot of first-gen students, or just students in general, not even first generation, but it's finding your own community and your own, and learning how to. Did you have to do this too, where you had to code switch when you spoke to certain people on campus?
I still do it. You still have to do it, yeah. And I code switch within Spanish too, and that's a whole nother wacky experience. Like, yeah. No, but I think going back to this notion of whiteness, I think it's also just for my own transparency, it's important for me to name too that like when I was in Guatemala for the first time, we'll probably get into this more, but when I was in Guatemala working with these indigenous communities, they also clearly identified me as a white man, right? They were like, I don't know what a Chicano is, like, and I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. And I was trying to explain it just because, you know, you try to explain it, but they were like, you're white. And I was like, man, I guess I am. And so it was important for me to think about my own whiteness vis-a-vis just that international experience, but also recognizing that both of my parents within Mexico would have been considered fairly white because, you know, phenotypically, not so much financially, but my mom was like 5'5" and had hazel eyes and light skin. Like that, it's whiteness in Mexico. We don't think of that in the same way in the United States, but I need to think about that. I need to think about what anti-Blackness looks like in my family. I need to think about what anti-indigeneity looks like in my family and how I've internalized it. And that's, I think just for everyone that's like, sees themselves as part of Latin America, that's certainly something that we really got to think about.
And you definitely, I know, oh my gosh, this is why I was so excited for this conversation too, because I also studied abroad in Latin America. I went to Cuernavaca. And so the first thing my host family said too was like, no, it is güera. And we're like, no, like we're Mexican. My professor, he was like, that's the top thing that you have to understand as an American student is that you're not Mexican when you're in Mexico. You're not, you know, whether you identify as Mexican, Mexican American, or Chicano, and even those labels are very different from one another when you're using them. And at least in California, that you're not that when you're abroad. They see you as American. They see you como un güero, you know, so una güerita. So you're through and through American when you're abroad. But, you know, going back to your experience in Guatemala, did you do that as an undergrad or with your other graduate programs?
So yeah, just to lay out a little bit of my traveling, just because, you know, like I get asked every once in a while to do presentations with kids in LA or whatever. And like every once in a while, people just don't believe that I ever existed because of all the traveling and things that I've done. They're like, whoa, like really? Like somebody from where we grew up also did all these things. And yeah, so it's a thing. But so when I was 18, I went to Australia, and that was like a interchange sort of thing. Nobody came, but it's that sort of high school, like, hey, be in another country sort of thing. And I, you know, like I mentioned before, I didn't grow up in a great place, and so I was always trying to leave. And Australia was that first opportunity. I got a scholarship. I opened up my perspective. When I was at Pitzer, I did a lot of human rights work in Chiapas, Mexico. We had a group that would go every year, and in the summer too sometimes. And then I did my study abroad in Venezuela. So I was there during the Chavez administration and during the second coup. So I saw directly what U.S. foreign policy does and what it means when you're a dark-skinned person trying to run a country and change things, right, as Chavez was. And so, and after I finished at Pitzer, I got a travel fellowship to travel around the world for a year. So I was in Guatemala, right? Yeah. So I was in, it's called a Massacre fellowship. Yes, it's a thing. I was in Guatemala for 6 months, South Africa, Northern Ireland. And so those 6 months were like the beginning of a lot of my work, both as a journalist and as a specialist in Guatemala. When I was in Guatemala, there was a massacre on August 31st, 2004 of a community that I was working with. So I wasn't there the day of the massacre, but I was around and I was taking film, and I created a documentary out of that, did my first journalism project. A lot of my PhD work was around the circumstances when it happened. But that really shaped me very intensely as a person, and I kept going back to Guatemala regularly for research. And I also ended up going to Europe for a while and a bunch of other places. But I've always tried to escape. That's been my thesis around traveling. And I think the funny thing, I lived in Minnesota for a decade. The funny thing about traveling is you just really find yourself. You can't really escape who you are or where you're from. You just find more clarity around what you're trying to do or who you are, what your identity is. Yeah,
definitely. And so, you know, going a little backtracking on that is that you actually created your own degree in socio-political pedagogy, right? And that's something that, you know, if you're not familiar with, you know, that's like not even graduate level, but that's definitely college talk, you know. So what made you want to create that as your bachelor's or your undergrad degree as in socio-political pedagogy? What is that?
Yeah. So I have a made-up degree, and that was the made-up name to my made-up degree. I had a different idea of what I wanted to call it, and that was an arbitrary name. But roughly what I was trying to do was like my interest in Guatemala started when I was an undergrad at Pitzer, and I took a class with a professor at Pitzer College around the history of radicalism in Latin America, the revolutionary period of the 70s, and the history of the Catholic Church within that radicalism too. And as someone that grew up Catholic, like hearing about liberation theology and hearing about this Marxist perspective on the Catholic social teaching was like really, really important for me. And when you look at that, when you look at consciousness raising, especially in Latin America, it's like, what I wanted to really understand was how people learned how to be radicals. Like, what was that education process? What was that? And thinking about Paulo Freire and the pedagogy of the oppressed, which is what I was thinking about a lot of the time. It was what is the pedagogy of radicalization? What is the pedagogy of asserting yourself, of fighting for something? And the same questions that I was having as an activist, as labor organizer. Like, how do we learn to become radical? Like, what do people need to know to seek their own path and to fight for their own truth? And so that's what I was trying to do at degree, was trying to understand, trying to get a sense of like, why do people rise up and why do people choose to change the conditions that they're in?
Wow. And so that kind of, I guess, opened the doors for you of what you can continue to study, right? Is that kind of what led you to choose to continue your collegiate education through a master's and is it a PhD program, right?
Yeah, I did. I didn't finish the doctorate. I'm ABD or what's called ALPA dissertation or a PhD candidate. So I got pretty far. Just didn't finish the dissertation. But yeah, I was looking at my PhD work was around the ways why it is that this community that I was working with was massacred, under what conditions, and what historically shapes that death. How is this tied to the Civil War? How is this tied to the radical period? How is this tied to the state response to people rising up? That was really the question I was trying to answer. Yeah.
And so I guess I'm trying to ask, like, why Guatemala? Was it because you have all this other experience through living in Venezuela for a little while and then going to Northern Ireland, and then you said you spent some time in South Africa? So, but why? What about Guatemala kind of spoke to you?
Yeah, I think so. Growing up in the 80s, when I did, like, I was always a very empathic, a very sensitive child. I was always the kid just crying a lot around different things. And I was very, very sensitive to the amount of Cambodian refugees and Salvadoran refugees around me. I was very sensitive to their stories of massacres and atrocities, even as a child. Like, none of us were articulating it this clearly, but you could feel that people were coming from a place of pain. You can feel that people were coming from a place of displacement. And like taking that class on the Church of the Poor in Latin America and the history of radicalism in Latin America, my professor was a specialist on Guatemala, and so she tended to emphasize more concretely the dynamics of violence in Guatemala. And you know, for those that don't know, in throughout the 1980s and 70s, the Guatemalan state response to guerrilla insurrection was the mass death of the Maya people of Guatemala, 300,000 deaths over a period of 15 years. And I couldn't shake that. It reminded me of the Cambodian cats I grew up with. It reminded me of the Salvadoran cats I grew up with. And I wanted to understand, I really just wanted to understand what we're capable of as a society, and what that looks like at its worst is genocide. And that's what happened in Guatemala. And I really wanted to just understand the factors that shape that. I don't know. I was always a very morbid child, so I just was really driven to understand the complexities of death, and mass death is a particular sort of animal.
Yeah, definitely. And I would think that living in Latin America around that time too kind of helped reinforce that interest of you want to talk about these stories. And that's something that I remember when I had first met you back at the Chicano Latino Youth Leadership banquet. You had mentioned that that's kind of what got you into like writing, right? Is that there's all these stories about Latinos or the Chicano experience, or just these stories about us, our people, but it's never written about us or by us. It's always written for us by others who don't know that background, who don't know our, migrant stories, who don't know anything about the community. They may have like some connection to it, but if they're not a part of that community. And so you took it upon yourself to make sure that, we're here, and these Latino writers are here, so we can share about our counter storytelling narratives. And so with that, you spent some great amount of experience you have a great amount of experience in activism, both here in California and in Minnesota. And I know you mentioned you lived in Minnesota for a while. Can you tell me a little bit more about that experience? How did it start? About you were in California and then you moved to Minnesota. Why did you start? Or actually, let me wait for that question. But yeah, tell me more about the experience.
Let's talk about storytelling, and then we'll talk about Minnesota. So
yeah.
I think you're really hitting an important note there that I haven't really articulated it like this, but that was really what motivated a lot of my work in Guatemala is there was literally a massacre that was happening right in front of me, and nobody was going to tell that story. Literally no one was going to do it. And without exaggerating, I was the only one that could tell that story, and that was never lost on me. Being the only person that can still tell that story is very compelling. I can't say no to that. I took great personal risk. I was chased by the government officials as well that night, but who else is going to do this? So I think that a lot of it comes from that is that, and then also in my activism early on, it was everyone was really desperate to get a mention in the LA Times, and it was well, why are we trying to get in the LA Times? So they always write about us in an awful way. Let's just create our own media, and let's create our own ways of telling stories. And so that's where I started becoming a writer. Is I built up this platform that I used to have called El Guateque, and El Guateque means a gathering place for working people, for campesinos, things like that. And so that's what I wanted to do, is tell our stories on our own terms. And that has been what's driven a lot of things too. And I'm glad you picked up on that when we met. But being able to tell our stories on our terms is the most important thing that we can do, both for our own ability to challenge white supremacy and to combat all these different evils, but also to recover from our trauma, because we all have it in some way. And the shaping and identifying of our own passions and interests and identity is one of the many steps to healing, is one of the many steps to recovering what's taken or what's lost.
Definitely. And, I do have kind of a question about, when you've written about Latinos in America, or just basically the narrative of how you kind of restructured it, and not only about Latinos in America, but also you wrote about the prison systems, and you've written about unions and everything that compiles that too. So especially knowing about that one-sided story that has always been told for us, or just other marginalized communities, have you found peace by doing so, or has it created kind of a rift in your ideas of the American dream? Because I know, for personal experiences, when I've read about Chicano stories, or when I've read about marginalized communities and their stories that those people in those communities have told, it almost created more of anxiety for myself. It created a sense of pride, but almost anxiety for myself, because of what I understand the American dream to be versus what it really is,
Yeah, I think that really got shattered for me, especially with Guatemalan history, because for those who don't know, the CIA took out Jacobo Arbenz in 1954, and thus it shaped the armed conflict that happens, thus shapes the genocide that happens. And so we have to really look clearly at the fact that U.S. is an empire that's just running people over, both within the United States and outside of the United States. And so I think even in my own reflections about my trauma and my parents, that American dream is a nightmare for us. It was a nightmare for them, and they put that on us. They put that abuse on me, on my siblings, but as I've reflected with my siblings, mostly on me. And so, the American dream is toxic. That American dream is trauma. That American dream is just a lie that's told to us so we can keep working for miserable wages, so we don't form unions, so we don't question U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah. So did you find some sort of, I guess, how would I word this? Not peace, but find some sort of motivation, to talk about our stories, or stories, other Latino stories, or other marginalized stories?
Well, to segue into Minnesota, so I was doing El Guateque. I was kind of doing some news, but ended up doing and this is when I started my podcast too. I ended up focusing a lot on musicians and artists. And the ironic thing is, I was mostly creating El Guateque while I was in Minnesota. So I was spending a lot of time coming back to LA, doing all these recordings and interviews. And I just found a really interesting niche with musicians. And what I later found out is that a lot of musician friends that were coming up were getting flown to Chicago for performances. And then my buddy Miguel and I, who's in Minnesota, realized that we can just ask our buddies in Chicago if we can just borrow them for a Saturday night, because they would have them perform on Friday and Sunday. And the musicians were totally down because it's an extra show. It was only like a 5-hour drive. And all these brown kids in Minnesota would come up to me after the shows and be like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever experienced. We've ever had this before. Like, this is incredible. And I was really proud about that. And I still feel really good about that. And I think it was one of the biggest contributions to the state of Minnesota. But at the same time, I was always really clear with folks that, like, this is not charity. I am not a nonprofit. Like, it is dope that you're here. I'm glad you paid, but like, I need this. I'm a brown man living in this tundra. I need my music. I need my rhythm. I need the things that make me feel good in order for me to feel good. And I need to experience this with you. Like, it's dope that you're here. I will enjoy this without you, but like, I am so happy to share this with you. And I just really needed people to understand that there's no charity here. This is just, we shape our community wherever we go. And I think that was the thing I learned in the Midwest, is people were really afraid to speak truth, and were afraid to assert themselves because they grew up in these, like, maybe as you were describing in your high school experience, like very similar, a lot of brown folks in the suburbs not with each other. There's no strength in that. People don't feel that strength. And that's all I wanted to do every day since I moved there, is where are my people and how do I create more of my environment, my community? And people were loving it. And so I kept just creating it.
Yeah. So, and is that kind of what made you start Workday Minnesota, that platform that you also created, right, in Minnesota?
Well, I didn't create Workday. No, Workday had already existed for about 25 years. But what was really important for me becoming the editor of Workday at the time was there were very few people of color that were editors of any English language publications. So that immediately meant that the stories and the choices that I would make as an editor were going to be completely different. And as soon as I started writing about immigrant workers, people were upset. They're like, I can't believe this. I'm a union member. How can you talk about immigrants? They're illegal, blah, 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 all that nonsense. And I was like, nah, man, we're going to talk about immigrant workers all day, every day, like nonstop. But that immediately, the editorial choice shaped it. Like through Workday, I wrote about Schulenburg County and how they were just warehousing immigrant detainees for like $10 a head or something like that. I actually don't remember the number exactly. But that's what happened as for me being a brown editor. I was able to tell all these stories that people have been ignoring. I was the first person to write about prison labor in Minnesota. Nobody had ever written about it, and to this day, people still haven't written about it because people still hit me up for quotes on it. But like,
wow.
Like finding the people that I identify with as a journalist is where I find these stories. And the people that I identify with are the most oppressed and the most dislocated. Like I also am formerly incarcerated. I did time in LA County Jail maybe 15 years ago now. I'm a convicted felon. That doesn't really affect my day-to-day too much. But those are the people that I get, and they get me, and we trust each other. And so that's been also the thing that's driven me, is being fearless and unapologetic about who I am, because the more I'm fearless and unapologetic about who I am, the more people want to talk to me about also being that person, also being a formerly incarcerated person, also being an immigrant worker. I'm not an immigrant worker, but those communities that I identify with, that I understand.
Yeah. And I bet, writing these things in Minnesota, it was very different. And the response that you got, I can't even imagine the type of response that you got, because I think writing it in California, you maybe would have still gotten those same reactions and responses, but probably not at a big level that you probably did in Minnesota, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the hostility was pretty high. And then also and also the flip side of that is the recognition and the importance of it. And a lot of my reporting became organizing campaigns, because there just weren't that many investigative journalists, and even less than that were thinking about the experiences of communities of color. And so as a journalist, I was able to really support and shape a lot of different campaigns and movements that happened throughout the decade. And certainly because of the murder of George Floyd, my reporting life changed dramatically, because that was also my home and my community. And being one of the first journalists to clearly identify his death as a murder was also significant, both for me and the communities that I care about, because it took other journalists a long time to come to that conclusion. It was fairly immediate to me that he was murdered. Like, that was fairly obvious. And it's disappointing that my fellow journalists didn't take that seriously.
So that kind of brings up another thing that I wanted to ask you, is that what is it like being a writer, being a journalist, and an investigative journalist at that you see other things that are being written, and now like you're like in it, you know, so you have had all this experience, you have other works, other articles that you've written and you've also produced as well, so watching things kind of unfold, what's that like?
Yeah, no, it's super aggravating. I'm really mad all the time because of it. Like, yeah, I had a really high standard both in how I treat people and in my standard of journalism, and to see how bad it gets on the street, like, man, it drives me crazy. Yeah. Like, you know, we were inventing this idea of trauma-informed journalism and with my reporting team. And the basic idea is that we encounter people in the worst circumstances. Like, if somebody bothers to find a journalist, that means they're tripping out. That means it's bad. And especially being a labor journalist, it's like, I'm talking to people that are for the first time facing sexual harassment in the workplace, or getting fired in the workplace, or trying to form a union and being targeted. So like, most folks that I'm talking to are feeling really vulnerable. And, you know, what that means for us as a trauma-informed crew is that we always believe people. We may not publish what they write because that's a different sort of process, but we do believe people no matter what. And we're there to just listen to them. And if that means we just chit-chat with someone for 3 hours and we don't write a story, that's fine. Because it's important to us, especially being in Minnesota, being more of a local reporter. My relationships really, really matter to me, and the bonds that I had with people really, really matter to me. And so I think that's what distinguished my journalism from, and the journalism that I was teaching, from other forms of journalism, where they just pop in, talk to you for 10 minutes, take a weird line of your statement, and then you'll never hear from them again. Like, that's just not what we believe in and what I believe in as a reporter and as a communicator.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, really important too, because I've heard other professors talk to me about how they've had reporters come speak with them, and they're like, okay, ask me what you want to ask me. Yeah. And they're always like, well, what are you trying, like, tell me what you're trying to get out of me at this point, because I keep answering the question the same way, but you're asking the same thing just differently. So what is it that you want from me, you know?
That breaks my heart when I hear that. I hear that all the time. Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Wow. And especially when it comes to speaking about like heavy topics such as immigration, prison rights, labor movements, and, you know, workplace violence, it's really unfortunate for the person on the other end of it being interviewed by reporters or being interviewed by people that, one, you would hope that they get your story right, but two, you would hope that there's no bias there when they're asking you the questions, you know? And I'm sorry, we didn't mention this back, but what was your master's and your other graduate program? Where was it at, and what was it in?
Right, I forgot to mention that. Yep. So I did a master's and PhD at University of California, Santa Barbara in the history program, with an emphasis on contemporary Guatemalan history, and like a subfield in. This is part of the reason I didn't finish. My subfield was in like comparative genocide. I was like, I can't keep studying that all my life. Like, I thought it was a good idea in my early 20s, but yeah, I couldn't sustain that. It was just too much, you know? And I think that's what drove my journalism. I needed to do something about it, not just hear about genocide all the time. It's too much.
Yeah. And I think it's really important too, that you were able to use your background, and even though it is a history, because I think a lot of people oftentimes think like, well, what the heck am I going to be able to do with a history degree? Well, there's a lot of things that you can do with your degree. It's just sometimes it's hard to find that pathway, but you were luckily able to find that pathway through your lived experiences, through you studying abroad, through you learning in your collegiate journey, that there is something that you are very passionate about, and there's a way to incorporate that with what you're trying to do as being a writer. And so did you always know that you wanted to be a writer at a young age, or was that something that just kind of like happened for you, or you made it happen for yourself?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think what I've come down to now is that I think since I was a little kid, I was always struggling to find a way to express myself. And so when I was very young, I played classical guitar. I played trombone, tried to write poetry. I was always trying to find a way to put out what I was feeling and the complexity of what I was feeling. But because I grew up fairly poor and not a great school, my English language skills were really, really bad. And it wasn't really until I chose history as a degree. And I think going to your point earlier, one of the things that's really important about history as just a methodology and an approach is it taught me a lot of really good habits just about really good writing. It taught me a lot of respect for interviewing people and to respect archives. And so I think it's significant. I didn't go to journalism school, but I learned how to be a writer and a journalist through my history degree. And so I think it's just important for people to know that generally. But I was always struggling just to figure out ways of shaping and describing what I was seeing. And I was very insecure as a writer because of English as a second language and all these issues with grammar that I still have. So I didn't see myself as a writer until probably really recently, actually, where I really just felt like the statements that I was making in my writing reflected what I was feeling. Like, it took a long time to get to that point. And, some of what I argue is my best writing was also extremely painful, because I was, especially around prison labor, I was exploring my own experience in incarceration and remembering some of that and trying to, bring that into the presentation I was developing. So writing has been a salve, but it's also been a really painful one. And it's certainly, there's something to be said for the fact that, like, when you get a cut, it doesn't heal until it bleeds a little bit. Like, the blood is there to soothe the injury and to clean it. And after that, you start healing. So there's a little bit of that going on too in some of my writing projects. They've been really painful in some ways, but also really cathartic and really healing. So there has been a lot of healing for me, and there's been a lot of a sense of power around some of the reporting that I've done. That the powerlessness that I felt as a child really isn't as much as a factor anymore, because I finally figured out how to speak my truth and to say the things that I've been wanting to say all my life.
Yeah, and I think that there's a sense of what's the word that I'm looking for? There's a sense of, I guess, not humility, but but pride. There's a sense of pride in that, where you're able to finally articulate your feelings, but also being able to use that as a source of power to uplift others and others in the community, but also stories that aren't really necessarily told, or they are told, but nobody wants to hear,
I think it's really important to point out too, because the white version of healing from trauma is like, I just improved myself and nobody else is impacted by this. Like, my healing means I make sense of a lot of shit, and I'm also way more effective at being angry, and I'm way more effective at targeting folks that piss me off. So like, I'm better at what I do. It doesn't mean that like I'm just in my head all the time and not engaging in the world. I engage in the world in a much different way, and a more effective way, I think, but in a different way. And I take care of myself, and I try not to burn out, all those things. But yeah, my trauma recovery has meant those that are near me are also impacted in a really positive way.
Yeah. And was that journey for you, did that start post-grad, or while you were also in college as well, trying to find your path and trying to find what, not what works for you, but like, just finding your path through education, but also trying to think about the future? And so those, I guess, skills that you gained from that, did that happen after the fact, or when? Yeah,
I really wish it happened a lot sooner. But so part of my story is that both of my parents died by the time I was like 26. My mom died from breast cancer when I was 24, when she was 65, and my dad died from a heart attack when he was 82, when I was 26. I had a much older father. And after my dad died, I was drinking a lot of the time, and that's how I ended up becoming incarcerated. I got a felony DUI because I injured 2 people as part of the DUI. And that's really where I started needing to really face my past. Like, I woke up in a jail cell, I hit rock bottom, and I was like, oh shit. And I knew about therapy, and I knew why it was important, and I tried to go to a therapist, but it was always these like alienating white people, and it just didn't feel right. But after that, it was like, no, I really gotta handle this. This is way out of control. And so it really starts from that point. And it's not like it was like a smooth path. It was other things that happened, but it starts from waking up in a jail cell, realizing that something's wrong. And I was in the middle of my PhD program. I was in the middle of being a union organizer. So it was like, there's a lot of demands on my time. I'm doing so much. This isn't working. I need to make this work better.
Yeah. Dang, sorry that, I'm sorry if that about asking that question, but thank you for, for being super upfront and honest. Cause I think that, for our listeners out there, a lot of the times, I know, at least for me, when I was in high school going through college, I thought it was going to be all like sunshine and rainbows and butterflies, and it was going to be great. But then, and you always hear those stories of like, like I didn't have 2 cents to my name. I was homeless. I was this, I was that. And you don't ever think that that's going to happen to you until it happens to you, or I didn't understand what
I did not think I was going to wake up in a jail cell. Yeah, I didn't think that was going to happen. That was my life plan. Absolutely.
Yeah. and like life happens, and that's the purpose of this interview, or I guess this conversation, is for our users out there to understand that it's not an easy path, especially if you are coming from a marginalized community, because realistically the education system is not built for us to succeed. It's built for other individuals to succeed, and it's hard for people in marginalized communities, and whether that be ethnically, socioeconomically, whatever it may be, that it's hard for us to succeed. But there are real life stories of people who have been through it, and have hit rock bottom, and yet are able to get past it and have successful careers, or be able to find their way in what their career journey is like, So thank you so much for being very upfront about that. And yeah, so I guess talking more about your career trajectory, and I know we've discussed it a little bit more, but talk to me a little bit more about what it's like to be a communication specialist for the California Faculty Association. So you have a background in writing, you have a background in, I would assume, public speaking with the union, organizations and stuff like that. You have a background in just working with the community. So what do you do as a communication specialist for the state of California, or for the Faculty Association?
Yeah, it's really, I think, one of the things that's really important to note too is that while I was a grad student at UCSB, I was also a leader within the Union for Teaching Assistants. So that's when I was like giving speeches and doing all those things. So it becomes really relevant to California Faculty Association, because we're an academic union. We're a union of representing teaching assistants, or not teaching assistants. We represent faculty, lecturers, coaches, librarians, and counselors. And the thing that makes me so excited to be part of CFA, and what made me okay leaving Minnesota and this really great job I had, was our leadership are Black, our leadership are brown, our leadership are Asian, and you just don't see that in the labor movement really that often. And so I love being part of a righteous, independent union whose leadership reflects my values, and our work reflects my values. We do a lot of work around campus police. We do a lot of work around challenging, combating stigma, supporting students getting counseling. Like, all the things that I really care about are part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And as a communications specialist, it varies on day to day, but really my job is to help people tell their story the best way possible. And sometimes we use videos, sometimes I do features around faculty. We use different tools to tell those stories.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So it's still kind of similar to what you had been doing. It's just now a different state, and two different, I guess, outlet as well.
I'm not a journalist in the distance. I'm on the front line now, and I'm more excited about that.
Oh, wow. Wow. So I've been asking a lot of our guests this. For some, it might be a little bit difficult to answer. For others, it's not so difficult. But are you able to look back at your past and, realize everything that you've overcome and everything that, I guess, your experience is, and now look at yourself in the mirror and say that you're proud of yourself?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think it's so much more significant for me to come to the point where I can really say with a lot of passion and enthusiasm that I do love myself too, and I love people that are around me. Because growing up in a lot of trauma and being traumatized by society too, you really don't learn how to love yourself very well. And that's taken a lot for me to earn and feel good about. It's taken some time.
Wow, that I always say this to other individuals that are guests of the series too, is that I think it's a beautiful thing when you can hear other people that you look up to, at least personally, and I would hope for our viewers out there too, is that you can see other people who you can resonate with, and you know that they are proud of themselves. So it's, for me, at least, a beautiful thing to hear that as well. Like I've said before, that when I was reading some of your stuff, I was getting really excited for this interview too, or this conversation, and I resonate a lot with what you've read and the things that you write. And so it's a beautiful thing to know that you are proud of yourself. And one day, others can also, that have the same background as you, can be able to say that to themselves as well. So we are gearing towards the end. Lastly, I guess what I want to ask you is, do you have any other advice or any, I guess, motivation that you could give our listeners out there, or anybody who's listening or has reached to the end of this conversation? Is there anything that you'd like to say to those out there?
One of the things, I do a lot of different presentations. I was also a labor educator, so there's just trainings and charlas and, gatherings and overnight camps. I've done that for years. And I recently did that with a bunch of Latinx youth. And the thing that came across really strongly to me, especially with young women, was I had a whole little section around negative self-talk and how damaging negative self-talk is for us. And with this group of 14-year-old women, the consistent thing that came up was them not believing that they're smart. Just that was it. And I wasn't able to talk to everyone, but to one young woman I was talking to in particular, I was like, okay, that's a negative self-talk you tell yourself. Is it true? And she said, no. It's absolutely not true. So there's white supremacy, there's all that bullshit, and also we cannot talk ourselves down. There's already enough that's trying to get in the way of our accomplishments, get in the way of our self-perception, get in the way of our having a strong identity. We need to be thoughtful about the way we talk about ourselves and the way we talk to other people, right? Because so much of my life is defined by who I've attached to. And when I've attached to people that are self-destructive, that aren't good for me, I've not had a good life. And when I attach to people that love me, that love themselves, that are down for me and are supportive of me, that make me feel good, that support me having a positive self-narrative, I've done a lot better in life. And it's a very complicated thing to pursue, and it's taken me years to do that as well, is to have boundaries and all those things. But it really is that simple. Just try to surround yourself with people that lift you up and make you feel good about yourself. But make sure to tell yourself that you're a good person and to not just saturate yourself with all this negative self-talk that we tend to do.
Yeah, I think that is super, super important, because I think just as humans, we tend to do that to ourselves, that we, you want to stay humble, but sometimes you humble yourself a little too much, that you end up talking yourself out of things, but
I can never do that. How many times we tell ourselves I can never do that? Too many times.
That's true.
Too many goddamn times.
That's true. I just had an interview with somebody, or a conversation with somebody, that he told himself that his mentality of how he got through a lot of things is that, well, I can do anything and I will do it. And if it's something that I can't do, then it's not physically possible for me to do. And I was like, oh, wow, like that. And that's the nice thing that I've been having about with these people that I've been speaking with too, is that they all have the same mentality, in the sense of like, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to get it done, because it doesn't matter how long it takes me. It doesn't matter who's in my way, whether that be, whoever, it's going to happen for me, and I think that's definitely a common theme that, our listeners out there should catch on, is that, be kind to yourself, but also know that if you want something done, you're going to get it done. So, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Your story has truly been inspiring. And like I said, I was very excited for this episode. And this is something that we like to do here at Inspírame, is to provide our listeners with real life stories of people who look just like us, to talk about their chismes, talk about their lived experiences. And again, I appreciate it so much for you being here with us today, Filiberto. And I really hope that, you continue writing and you continue doing what you're doing, because it is important for others and for our community to be able to see ourselves out there in media, but shown in a positive light. So for our listeners out there, don't forget to check out our free TecoGuide app, where we will always show you the quickest, most affordable way possible to earn your certificates or degrees. So thank you again, Filiberto, so much for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to chat whenever you have time.
Of course. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning into TecoGuide, the app focused on bringing you tools and content to help you make better decisions about school, life, and career. We hope this episode has inspired you to pursue and excel in your own educational and career journey. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and share.